All right. So, oh, darn. Of course, not getting everything added probably doesn't help. Okay.
Shoot, tonight you got like 4 minutes per page.
I know. It'll take it. No, this is it.
He can fill
I don't know why you shouldn't be surprised. I don't know.
No.
So,
Where is it?
right after Judges. So right before 1 Samuel.
Page 443.
Yes.
I'll get
Oh,
close.
mine's 265. That's 305.
Joshua Judges.
365.
It's short, so it'll be just a couple pages.
Okay.
There.
All right.
Yeah,
So,
that happens.
so to give you kind of the same thing we've been doing with each book, a lot of we don't actually know who wrote Ruth. It's not, there's no one says who wrote it. But a lot of scholars, as well as Jewish tradition, hold that Ruth is written by Samuel. And so in that case, it was probably written sometime between David's anointing in 1025 BC and when he captured Jerusalem in 1004 BC. The audience for Ruth is all the Israelites after the time of the judges, and would be able to look back and see. A big part of this is a discussion of the ancestry of David. Okay, and we will definitely see that discussion, is that this is the book of Ruth is telling a story that gives us a picture of where David came from. Okay, that is a primary thing. This particular book mentions that Samuel wanted to show the sin of the tribe of Benjamin, which we see in 1 Samuel at the end of Judges, and then go right into the connection to Judah, who is the line of kings through David into the tribe of Judah. So it's giving us this kind of idea. The theme and kind of the very important section of that theme is the discussion of the kinsman redeemer, and we'll talk kind of at length about that, but I want to give you that phrase. The key verse here is in Ruth chapter 1 verse 16, and it says, "But Ruth said, 'Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God.'" Okay. This is kind of the premise here, and one of the primary elements of it is this idea that Ruth enters into the covenant through her connection to Naomi and her unwillingness to leave Naomi. Okay. So those will be some major things that we need to talk about, is this idea of the covenant and how Ruth enters into that, and also then how God moves in their lives as a result of that. And that's kind of the primary thing here. So when we look at Ruth chapter 1, it begins by telling us that there was a famine in the land during the days of the judges. So remember, the last book we dealt with was Judges, and we remember just how absolutely bad it got. It was a very, very spiritually dark time for Israel. They brutally failed to follow and do what they were supposed to. And so in a way, what Ruth does is, in this very dark time, here's a story of light in the midst of that. Okay. So in the midst of all this garbage, we see this small group of people that, while it begins with some disobedience, it ends with obedience and God moving in a mighty way. Okay. So in the days of the judges, there was a famine, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah went to the country of Moab. So he decided to leave Israel completely. So he goes off into Moab to live because there's a famine in the land of Israel and they can't feed themselves, is kind of the idea. And we get the idea. It's a family of four, him, his wife, and his two sons. Okay, then it gives us the name Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and then his two sons. They go to Moab, they live there, but Elimelech dies, leaving Naomi a widow. Also, during, we don't know exactly, but in that we have both of her boys getting married. And one to a woman named Ruth. Now, this is an to the first chapter of is in a good place. So she says, look, so basically what she tells the two daughter-in-laws is, I don't want you, why don't you guys go back? This is ridiculous for you to come and be lonely and desperate. And then that is clearly how she phrases it. He says, okay, back my daughters, why will you go to have a husband this night and should bear sons? Would you wait till they're grown? Would you refrain from marrying? No, daughters. And here's where we get it. For it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. So notice the phrasing. She says, I don't want you to suffer because God has decided to do this to me. Okay. God has taken away my husband. God has taken away my two children. And I don't want you to suffer with me. Okay. So Orpah eventually decides to go back, but Ruth does not. Okay. It says Ruth clung to her. And eventually in verse 16, and this is where we read the key verse, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Now, I want you to see the power of this statement, okay? Because in a way, this is the same kind of commitment that we would discuss in a marriage. Notice how it's phrased. I will go wherever you go. I will live wherever you live. The people that you call your people, I will call my people. The God that you call your God, I will call my God. And I will die in the place you die, and I will be buried in the place you're buried. I will stick with you no matter what. Okay. She is covenanting with Naomi that she will not leave. In fact, she goes at the end, may the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts us. So notice, what's the famous statement at the end of a marriage? As long as you both shall live. She's covenanting. And kind of the biggest part of this covenanting that is very, very important to understand going forward is one line right in the middle. Your God will be my God. What is she doing? She's not only covenanting Naomi, she's covenanting with Naomi's God. She's covenanting with the God of Israel that you will be my God from now on. Okay. So it says, when Naomi saw that she determined, she stopped trying to convince her to leave. But this doesn't fix Naomi's attitude. Okay. We see this absolute conviction from Ruth, but Naomi still can't see the blessing in that. Because notice, it says they come to Bethlehem. They come to Bethlehem. There's a stir, and all the ladies in the community are, wait, is this Naomi? And she goes, oh, no, 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 don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara, which, by the way, means bitter. So understand this kind of very, very real discussion here. No, no, no. I'm changing my name to bitter. Why? Because the Lord is bitterly with me. Okay. Now, this is something we need to at least discuss for a bit. Is she wrong? Understand that we can make a case that God has made these moves in her life. Okay. Now, we have a tendency sometimes to try to make it sound like we don't believe God was involved in training in our life. You know, well, this is a thing. It was, whatever. But at some level, we have to admit that God knows what's going on in our lives, and He allows the things that are bad that occur in our lives. So then Naomi's not wrong to say that. But what is really going on is that she is not seeing the other side of the coin yet. And let's be fair. We've all been at that point at some point, right? Where God has been, God has dealt bitterly with us, and we can't see how he's gonna turn things around. And it's rough, it's difficult, we're hurting, we don't understand, and we can't see where God is going to move. But I will tell you that even as we hit this moment where Naomi is embittered, God has already begun to move to heal her. How? He's brought Ruth to her. Okay, so we see this come at the end of chapter 1. We see this very interesting discussion. So I'm going to read this real quick. This is the last verse. So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. They came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Now, there's an interesting word play here that in ESV and in New American Standard we get. In some translations you don't see. It says, Naomi returned, And it says, and Ruth with her, who returned from the country of Moab. Who returned from the country of Moab? No, she didn't.
She was from Moab, right?
She's from Moab. But the construction of the sentence definitely means the writer of Ruth was speaking of Ruth and not Naomi. So then how do they confirm it that she returned from Moab when she was from Moab? Well, it comes back to the covenant discussion. When she committed herself to Naomi and to Naomi's God, she became a part of the covenant community. And so she is returning home, even though it was not her home.
Mine says Naomi returned
Yeah.
from Moab, accompanied by Ruth.
Mm-hmm. But in the Hebrew, we have Naomi returned and Ruth, the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her. And then it says who returned from the country of Moab after that. So there's a double return that goes on. Scholars that look at that typically say that what's going on is there's a theological truth here that Ruth became a member of the covenant community when she covenanted herself to Naomi and her God. So her home became Israel, even though she'd never been there. Okay. And then at the very end, we get this little bit of time. It's the beginning of the barley harvest. Probably means it's mid-spring. It's, early in the year. It'd be kind of winter barley, March, April, that kind of area of the year where they're beginning barley. So then at the beginning of chapter 2, we are introduced to the other main player in the story. Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Okay. So this guy named Boaz, and he was a righteous and worthy man, is kind of the idea here. Okay. Then we go back to Ruth and Naomi. Ruth tells Naomi, let me go out to the field and glean among the ears of grain. Let me go find a field to go glean in. Okay. And we've discussed this a little bit before, that the law of Moses gave a set of rules for the way you harvested, that the purpose was for this very thing. Okay. So you'd go out and you'd harvest your wheat or your barley or whatever. And it'd say you go through, and when you bundled, if some fell out of the bundle, or if you missed some stalks while you were harvesting, you were not allowed to go back. You were only allowed to go through the field once. And the reason was because then that you dropped would be there for the poor and the needy okay. But I want you to remember there are two things that are going on here that are very important. We are in a very dark time in Israel. And Ruth is a foreigner. And even at this point, the children of Israel would have been very against people from outside, for outsiders. So she's taking a bit of a risk to go do this, but it's the only way she feeds them. But then we see the first of this statement. I love this happens. And she happened to come just by complete chance. She ended up in Boaz's field. Now, it does this several times in this chapter, but I want you to understand, and it happened just means that God didn't reveal that he was moving yet. It's God acting anonymously. And it just so happened that she came to a part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz happened to show up at the field that day. Just happened to. And he looks and he sees this woman helping in the field. Now, there's a couple things you need to know. There is clearly, and as we talk about some of the conversations here, that Boaz is probably a older, 30, 40, maybe even in starting in his 50s. And Ruth is maybe in her 20s, maybe early 30s. She's much younger than him. Okay, and we see that in some of the ways he responds to her, and we'll see another spot here in a minute that kind of goes into this. So he goes, who's the woman out there who's young woman, T? And he goes, oh, that's the young Moabite who came back with Naomi from Moab. And came to me and said, could I please gather among the sheaves after the reapers? And she's worked hard. She came early this morning, right as the sun was coming up, and she's worked almost nonstop. I think she took one small break. She has really worked hard. Okay. So then Boaz goes to Ruth, and once again, talking the age difference. Watch. Now listen, my daughter. Okay. And he says this, please don't go glean in any other field but this one. Okay. Keep close to to the ladies who are working. Let your eyes be on the field they're reaping and go after them. And this is the reason. He says, have I not charged the young men not to touch you? By the way, we see Naomi tell her later, yeah, make sure you stay in that field, because if you go to someone else's field, you might get assaulted. Someone might take advantage of you. Okay. So he says, but I will protect you. I've told my men to leave you alone. I've told them they are not to touch you. Okay. When it comes to when you get thirsty, go over to the water jugs that I've got set for my workers and get water. You can drink you can go get water from among the workers, all of that. He's going above and beyond. Okay. And she recognizes that. And she says, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me? Because I'm a foreigner. And here's his answer. And I want you to see this because it fits back to the discussion of chapter 1. All that you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been told to me. And how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So here's what Boaz is saying. Why have you found favor? Because you have committed to Naomi. Now remember, he's related to her. You have committed yourself to Naomi. You've left your home. You've left your people, and you have put yourself under the wings of my God. And so I will act on his behalf to help protect you. Why is he doing this? Because he is acting as God would have him act for one who is taking care of a member of his family and one who is chosen to follow. Now, here's another little tidbit for you, just in case you haven't noticed this. Boaz's father was named Salmon. Boaz's mother, or at least grandmother, there's some question. Understand when it says was the in the Bible, it can be there can skip a generation. Was Rahab. Okay, so the Canaanite woman who came out of Jericho is his mother or grandmother. Now Ruth has come, and so he is supporting her because she has chosen to dwell among the people and has placed herself under the wings of God. Okay, so then he goes on, he feeds her lunch. He lets her have lunch with the workers, and then tells the men again, don't mess with her at all. I don't care how close she gets to the sheaves. I don't care what she does. Leave her alone. And in fact, pull some extra stalks of grain out of the bundles and leave them for her to pick up. Make sure she gets extra. Okay, he's taking care of her. By the way, it says she gleaned till evening, and after she gleaned it, she pulled all of it. She had about a little over 5. It's an ephah is about 5.5 gallons. It's a significant amount of grain. It would have been enough grain to feed him for a week or more. Okay, so he was really generous with her. She comes back home and Naomi goes, "Wow, where'd you get all that?" And she goes, "Well, I ended up in this field of a man named Boaz, and he told me to stay here and stay with them." And she goes, "Oh, well, he's a close relative. He's one of our redeemers," which we'll talk a little bit about before we go on, and says, "Make sure that you do stay in the fields he's doing." Okay. So between chapter 2 and chapter 3, we fast forward a month or more because now we're at the end of the barley harvest. Okay. So they've gone through the entire barley harvest. And now we come back and Ruth apparently goes every day and gathers and all of that, does all the things she's supposed to do. And then Naomi, there's a couple things here. Naomi begins to hope again, certainly as part of this. But Naomi also begins to plan. Okay, she becomes a little meddlesome. But she understands the culture. And she says, "Okay, here's what I want you to do." Okay. Tonight is the party at the end of the harvest. And that's exactly what's going on. They're winnowing the grain. This is probably the last night of them winnowing the grain. And so in addition to doing the work, they're going to have a celebration for the harvest. And she says, "So since he's a close relative, here's what I think you should do. Go bathe, clean up, put on your best clothes, put on a cloak. And what you need to do is you need to go down to the threshing floor and hide there until everybody's kind of gone to bed. Wait till Boaz lays down and then go and lay down, uncover his feet and lay down at his feet. And then do whatever he tells you." Okay, that's exactly how this is phrased. So she does that. Okay, it says that there was alcohol at the party because he's Mary.
Where do you read that about the party?
Okay, so it says, verse 6, she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, that's kind of vernacular to where he was slightly intoxicated. Okay. He went to lie down at the end of a heap of grain. And so she goes and she uncovers his feet and she lays down at his feet. This because if you ever look at this, there are those that will try to say that uncovering his feet is a euphemism and it means something untoward, all of that. I would tell you that the way this story is worded and the way this story is done, and that is not the case. Cultural thing. Nothing. This is very much in the statement in chapter 2. He says, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." Now watch, in chapter 2, we saw this moment in chapter 2 that we talked about being a connection to her commitment in chapter 1. He says, okay, the Lord repay you for what you've done. Okay. And a full reward be given to you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So he says, I'm doing this for you because you have put yourself under God's wings. And then she responds here, may your wings be God's wings for me. You showed favor to me because I came under the wings of God. Now I'm asking to come under your wings because you are by culture a redeemer for my family. Okay. Then he responds, and this is another one of the reasons why we talk about age here. He says, may you be blessed by the Lord, much greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. So here is kind of the idea. And we don't know all of this. Some of this is reading into the text, but we get the sense that Ruth is quite the looker. And she's a younger woman. Boaz is significantly older than her. So she could have went and searched for anybody to marry her. See, she could have went to where all the young men were and gotten one of them to be interested in her and marry her and all of that. But there's a couple of details here. If she had married someone who was not a redeemer, then Elimelech, his inheritance would have been lost to his family. That's the whole reason for this process. Okay, we saw it a couple of other places. In fact, the names come up. Okay, Tamar, Judah and Tamar. Judah gives Tamar to her oldest son, and he does wicked in the sight of the Lord, so God strikes him dead. Then Tamar's given to the next son. Why? Well, it seems really weird, but the idea was that then the second son, whenever they had a baby, he would be the heir for the older son. Which the second son goes, well, I don't want my older brother to have an heir. So he humiliates her by spilling his seed on the ground. God gets angry at him and strikes him dead too. Okay, and then we go through that whole process. The idea here to come to Boaz is that if Boaz takes her as his wife, their firstborn son will technically belong to Naomi. It will be Naomi's grandson. And then allows Elimelech's part of the inheritance from God to continue down the family line. And so what she's doing is she is doing what would be proper for a Jewish woman to do in this situation, in asking to be redeemed so that she can provide a son for her dead husband. So there's a lot of culture in here. And by the way, this does come back to this discussion, is that often in our culture, we read this and we try to find a large amount of romance and all of that. It really is kind of a business transaction. Now, do I think that they loved each other? Yeah, I do. But that's not the main point here. It's the redemption. Okay, so he says, it's good that you chose to, it's almost this. I'm amazed that you would decide to come to me as a redeemer instead of going and chasing some young guy. And it's kind of you both to me and to your mother-in-law. So, and now my daughter, do not fear. I will do all that you ask. And by the way, this is another reason why we can say with some certainty there's nothing untoward here. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. the entire community has seen your value and that you're righteous and that you're all that. Okay. As the Lord lives. Okay. So he goes on, yet. So, but there is one small problem. There's one relative who's closer to you than I am. Okay. The goal is redemption. He says, I would love to redeem your family, but to be proper, I have to go to this one person who's closer in line than I am. But he says, hey, let you know, I'll take care of it. If he'll redeem you, that's great because it takes care of your family. If he won't, then I will do it, no questions asked. Okay. So then she stays the rest of the night, but before it's light enough for anybody to recognize, she goes home so that there's no rumors. Okay. So comes back to Naomi, tells him all that she said, and he goes, okay. So I know it's going to be hard to wait, but it'll happen today. He won't let it rest. And that's exactly what happens. He goes to the gate. The guy that is a closer redeemer comes up and he goes, hey, I need to talk to you. And he gets witnesses together to work out this deal. And he says, so Naomi has a field that belonged to Elimelech that needs to be redeemed for the family. And he goes, okay, I'll redeem it. That sounds like a great idea. Okay. So I think there's some clarity here that Boaz is doing this in a particular way to make it work. Oh yeah, I'll redeem a field. That means more property for me. But when you do that, you've got to marry Ruth and you've got to have a kid for her dead husband. Well, we don't know exactly what the guy's situation is, but here's what the guy realizes. Well, if I marry Ruth and we have a boy, then not only is he the heir to Elimelech's stuff and Elimelech's son's stuff, but he also becomes heir to my stuff, which means then that I water down my inheritance to my own children. Well, I'm not willing to do that. See, this is really the discussion is he goes, oh, no, I can't do that because then he would be an heir to me too. And I don't want that. And so Boaz goes, okay, well, if you don't want to do it, then I certainly will. And they, fun little look into Hebrew culture, they trade shoes.
Read something into that.
It was the custom in former times in Israel that one would give the sandal to another. Okay. Now, so he marries Ruth. He purchases this property. He marries Ruth. And they have a child. Okay. Named Obed. Now, I want you to see, because like I said, Naomi is a critical element to all of this. So, however, let's look at what the witnesses say, okay? Because this is very interesting. So, we'll start at 7. Now, this was the custom in the former times of Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging to confirm a transaction that one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. And Boaz said to the elders of all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. Okay. Now, notice it does discuss the idea of he bought her. Okay. Now, let me make sure you understand. Remember that the word redeem means to buy. We are purchased. Okay. He's not purchasing her as a slave. He's purchasing her in order to give her the child to inherit for the inheritance. He's redeeming her. Okay. But then in verse 11, then all the people who are at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah. Okay. So what would be the importance of Rachel and Leah to these people? They're the mothers of all the tribes of Israel. Understand, they're naming Jacob's wives. Now, there are 2 concubines in there too, but certainly for people from the tribe of Judah, they would have. Leah is the mother of their entire tribe. May God make her like Rachel and Leah, who gave us all the tribes of Israel. May you act worthily. Okay. So may you do this right. May you act like you're supposed to. And may you be renowned in Bethlehem, and may your house be like the house of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah. So now we have another one of these. Perez is the sub-tribe that Boaz would have belonged to. So remember, we have Judah's the main group, and then Judah had 3 sons. 2 of them were killed. Then through Tamar, who, remember, pretended to be a prostitute, she has 2 sons, Perez, and I don't remember the one after. But Perez is the one who goes through the lineage of Jesus. It's the kingly line. So, may your house become like the house of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this woman. So it's a blessing for her children. So Boaz took Ruth. She became his wife. He went into her. The Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, so remember the beginning of the story. Hey, Naomi, you're back. Don't call me Naomi. Call me bitter. Call me bitter, because the Lord has been bitter to me. It's been awful. He just done terrible things to me. Now the women tell Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer. Hey, Naomi, remember how bitter you were when you came? Look at what God did. He didn't leave you without a redeemer. And may his name, the name of the Lord, and the name of your Redeemer be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. And then here is the coolest part of the whole thing, because now they recognize what God did all the way back in chapter 1. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons. So here's what the women have now said to Naomi. Look at what God has done. He's given you a redeemer. He's given you one to restore your life and to nourish you and to give you a child, a grandson in your old age. All because of your daughter-in-law, who, when you really look at it, Naomi, she was worth 7 sons. Because she loved you and she would not abandon you. And now she's given birth to your redemption. And it says, then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. And they named him Obed. And he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And then we come back and we see, now these are the generations of Perez. Okay. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. It doesn't say it here, but in Matthew it says via Rahab. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. So we watch. And so notice, okay, Perez is the son of Judah by a strange circumstance. Solomon fathers Boaz by a unusual circumstance with a woman who was a prostitute and a pagan who chose to follow God. Boaz fathers Obed by a woman from a foreign country who commits herself to the Lord. And so we see this idea of redemption. See, Ruth is redeemed by God when she commits herself to Naomi, under whose wings you have put yourself, right? That's what it said in chapter 2. May the Lord bless you, whose wings you have put yourself under. And then God, through his wings, spreads Boaz's wings over her to give her a child that not only redeems Naomi and all of the stuff of Elimelech, but gives Ruth a life that leads to David, that then leads further on to which, by the way, this is a major theme here, which then leads all the way to the true kinsman redeemer, Jesus. Okay, let's look at that for just a moment. We've got about 5 minutes, but let's look at this discussion of the kinsman redeemer for just a minute. So the idea is that a kinsman redeemer, number one, must be of your family. Okay. So how does Jesus apply there? Well, he's fully man. It really is one of the reasons he had to be born of a virgin. He had to be born of a woman, because he must be kinsman with us to be a kinsman redeemer. So through his death, burial, and resurrection, he becomes for us in the same way. He restores to us what we lost because of our own sin. Our sin caused us to lose a relationship with God. Jesus, through his virgin birth, through his life on earth, through his death, burial, and resurrection, purchases us out of this place and redeems us back into the relationship we lost, which is exactly what happens here. Now, Ruth's relationship going forward is with Boaz, but Boaz is choosing to have this relationship with her allows her to recover what could have been from her first husband, a child, to take care of her in her old age and to be, all the things that are part of that culture when we talk about children. He restored all that to her. In the same way, Jesus restores to us our relationship with God. He is our kinsman redeemer. And so, as we read this story, we have to recognize that while Jesus isn't specifically discussed, there is a primary movement of seeing what Jesus has done in our lives through what God does through Boaz and Ruth and Naomi. And that even when the times are dark, God is still moving. Questions, comments? I know this is, it's still like drinking from a fire hose, but
So Rahab married an Israelite?
yes.
Okay.
So Rahab would have married Boaz's dad or probably dad.
Okay.
According to this, there's some discussion in the language, and I guess I need to say this. When you see, particularly in these genealogists, like it says, Perez fathered Hezron. Perez was there's a thing in the scripting that happens sometimes in these genealogies. We know it's there in Jesus's genealogy, both in Matthew and in Luke. But the idea is that we see the word father and we think, okay, he was the father of. But it doesn't, that's not exactly what the word means. The word actually means was the ancestor of. When we read it in English, it says, and so begot so and so.
So they leave out some generations.
Sometimes. There is always that chance. In the genealogy of Jesus, it's clear that we don't know where all of those take place, but Matthew makes it a point to go in and do 14 generations from Abraham to David, I think is how it works. Then 14 generations from David to the exile, and then 14 generations from the exile to Jesus. So it's possible, but it is more likely that he chose 14. There's some difficulty when we look at that, but it really is. It's not the same thing as going to ancestry.com and going, okay, how does that all? But even then, sometimes you run into a place where you find an ancestor, but you may not find the direct one. You may be a generation removed, or it may be a great uncle instead of an uncle, or those things happen. And certainly in this case, that would have been. They're hitting high points.
Mm-hmm. And you're saying even when things are dark,
God's still moving. This is maybe not the darkest time, but this is a dark time in the history of Israel, and God is prepping for the future. Because what do we see? We see in Judges all the garbage they're doing. And we talked about how dark the judges the time of the judges were. And yet, watch what we have. We have God move in a very real way to continue the lineage that would lead to the king. And that leads to King David, and then from King David leads to King Jesus, who is the promised one.
Does that go through Joseph?
So no.
Goes through Mary?
So the lineage in Matthew probably goes through Joseph. We are not totally sure. They're both of the tribe of Judah. Okay. And they're both of the line of David. So at this point, it would have been the same. And we're not entirely sure where it breaks off. The Matthew one is definitely of the line is of Joseph's lineage, because it finishes off, gave birth to Joseph, whose wife was Mary, who the Mary one, the Luke one, we have a little bit harder because there's some moves, there's some changes. But of course, when you're talking that many generations, there would be some places where maybe he chose a different line out of the family to the, because there is a lot of marriage within the tribe, partly because that was what was asked of them, because of the land and the property and all of that. There are, we're talking about thousands of years of genealogy to get through all of that.
I can't even read through all of it.
I understand. But at the same time, the thing that is very cool about it is that you find very powerful theological themes even in those genealogies. If you ever want a very interesting a fictional biblical fiction book read, there's a book series called, I think it's I can look, it's called Women of Faith or something to that effect. And it's short stories on each of the women in the genealogy of Jesus. So if you ever look at it, there are 5 women in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew. Tamar, we've discussed 3 of them already. Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, although it doesn't mention her by name. It calls her the wife of Uriah. So it says, and Solomon, David begot Solomon by the wife of Uriah. So literally in the genealogy of Jesus, David gave birth to Solomon with another man's wife. And then the last one is Mary. Well, when you look at those, when you go in and look at each of those stories in Scripture, they're each very, very powerful stories of God working in the midst of difficult circumstances. Tamar's been abandoned by her father-in-law and basically told, yeah, go live like a widow for the rest of your life.
So what is the book's name?
I'll have to look. They're named after each of the women. Michelle can tell you, she reads them every year at Christmas. And goes through all of them every year at Christmas. But the idea is that understand that what Ruth tells us, and really as a microcosm of the entirety of the Old Testament, is watching God move to bring us to Jesus. And I know there are people that say, oh, we just don't need to focus on the Old Testament, but you can't really understand the New Testament if you haven't.
Really the base.
Yeah, I mean, it's foundation. And it's very, very important. All right, we will stop right there. We will pick up with 1 Samuel next time.
Thank you so